During the coldest days of winter, when temperatures dropped below freezing, a German shepherd was found wounded and alone in the snow. Many believed he would not survive, but when a man grappling with his own struggles chose to take a chance and rescue him, something extraordinary unfolded. This is a tale that highlights survival, bravery, and the profound connection that would transform their lives permanently. Prepare yourself for an experience that will leave you amazed and motivate you to persevere. Jack Sullivan had always struggled to adapt to the brutal winters in the mountains. The relentless snowfall covered the pathways with a thick, icy layer. Each time he stepped forward, the sound of crunching snow beneath his boots was the sole noise accompanying him on his return to his cabin. While he still felt that moving away from the hustle and bustle of city life was the right choice, the lengthy days spent in solitude made him question whether being surrounded by silence could ever be sufficient. The biting cold wind stung his skin, yet he remained unfazed. Memories of his previous career as a paramedic, where he was constantly amidst people saving lives, while also experiencing loss, continued to haunt him. Being alone did not mend his emotional wounds. However, it occupied his mind enough so he didn't have to confront what truly troubled him. As he navigated around a curve in the path, something caught his attention. A faint sound, muffled by the heavy snowfall, indicated movement among the trees. Jack halted, scanning the surroundings, his vision obscured by the blizzard. Once more, the sound reached his ears, a soft whimper that was barely noticeable, yet clearly a plea for help. His heart began to race with a sense of urgency as he followed the noise until he stumbled upon a scene that brought him to a standstill. There, lying on the ground and almost hidden beneath the snow, was the injured dog. The snow-covered landscape revealed a German shepherd, its fur tangled with ice and blood, presenting a grim sight. The dog's body appeared contorted, indicating it had been left here to succumb to the harsh storm. For a fleeting moment, its wide, terrified eyes locked onto Jack's before it emitted another feeble whimper. The biting cold caused its breath to form visible puffs in the frigid air. Jack inhaled deeply, his thoughts racing. Initially, he felt an overwhelming urge to turn away, to abandon this suffering creature and seek refuge in his cabin. However, something in the dog's gaze struck a chord within him, evoking memories of his own struggles and pain, compelling him to hesitate. The dog remained still, and Jack feared it might be too late to help. Yet there was a glimmer of life that sparked a flicker of hope within him. Without a moment's hesitation, Jack knelt in the snow, wincing as the cold bit through his warm jacket. He cautiously extended a hand toward the injured dog, speaking softly, "Hey there, boy." Attempting to soothe the animal, "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog's body twitched slightly in reaction, its breathing labored but steady, and Jack could sense warmth emanating from the creature. The dog's breathing pattern served as a reminder that, despite the dire situation, it was still striving to survive. Jack scanned his surroundings, his mind racing as he sought a way out of this predicament. He realized that his cabin was too distant to reach quickly, and carrying the dog back with him was simply not feasible. Nevertheless, the dog required assistance, and Jack couldn't abandon it to perish alone in the midst of the storm. With great caution, he removed his jacket and placed it over the dog's body, attempting to protect it from the harsh cold. Then, in a moment of determination, Jack did something he had never imagined he'd do. He lifted the injured dog into his arms, disregarding the discomfort in his own joints, as he made his way toward the safety of his cabin. The journey back felt unending, with every step presenting a challenge, as the snowfall became heavier and the wind grew colder. However, Jack pushed himself onward. He understood that this situation transcended the simple fact of carrying an injured dog through the snow. It represented a vital opportunity for both of them to recover. As the fierce wind howled and the storm continued to unleash its fury around them, Jack's resolve solidified. He was determined to rescue this dog, No matter the obstacles he faced, he felt compelled to act, as there was no other option available to him. Jack fought against the elements, barely managing to carry the dog through the relentless storm. After a long and exhausting journey, he finally arrived at the comforting warmth of his cabin. The fire in the fireplace crackled weakly while the scent of burning wood filled the cramped space. He carefully laid the German Shepherd on an old blanket that was placed near the fire. His heart raced due to both the physical exertion he had just experienced and the intense cold surrounding him. As he turned around, Jack noticed the blood staining his jacket, and his hands shook slightly with anxiety. The dog, which he decided to name Kai after a brief moment of contemplation, was alive but barely so. Its body was rigid from the frigid temperatures, and the wounds on its fur were much worse than Jack had initially thought. The snow covering its coat had melted, leaving patches of damp fur clinging to its sides. Jack acted swiftly, removing his wet clothes and retrieving the first aid kit he kept on hand for emergencies. He worked with precision as he began to tend to the dog, although his thoughts were preoccupied with the situation. It was evident that the dog had endured immense suffering before being left out in the snow. It bore deep scars, both on its body and in its spirit. As Jack cleaned the injuries, Kai hardly reacted, his eyes reflecting pain, confusion, and fear. He emitted soft growls when Jack touched his broken leg, which clearly indicated that it was fractured. Despite his distress, there was no trace of aggression, only a silent, desperate request for assistance. "You're going to be okay," Jack murmured gently, though he wasn't entirely convinced of those words himself. He had never encountered a dog in such severe condition before, and the snowstorm outside was growing more intense by the minute. Jack realized that he couldn't simply wait for the storm to subside. He needed to take immediate action. The cabin wasn't equipped for a complete recovery, as he lacked appropriate medical supplies and the necessary skills to handle such a serious injury. However, he did possess something that might help. Determination often manifests as a stubborn resilience that has helped him navigate through numerous challenges throughout his life. For the first time in several months, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and motivation to fight once more. Despite his fatigue, Kai's eyes connected with Jax's, suggesting an understanding that transcended mere companionship. There was something unique in the dog's gaze that distinguished it from any other animal Jack had previously rescued. This situation felt profoundly significant, almost beyond his comprehension. After tending to the dog's injuries as thoroughly as possible, Jack fashioned a makeshift bandage for Kai's wounded leg. Outside, the storm continued to unleash its fury, but within the cabin, a different energy was stirring. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this pivotal moment, deciding to save a life, had set off a chain reaction he hadn't anticipated. He had retreated to the mountains seeking solace, not to become re-immersed in a realm filled with pain and obligations. Yet here he was, dedicating himself fully to ensuring the survival of a dog in distress. As the night wore on, Jack maintained the fire's warmth, vigilantly keeping watch over Kai. Gradually, the dog began to find his comfort. His breathing became more rhythmic, and the tremors that had previously racked his body lessened. Jack found himself unable to suppress a sense of hope as he observed the changes in Kai. Jack couldn't help but smile faintly. It was a minor achievement, yet it felt like his first genuine victory in a considerable time. He stayed awake throughout the night, caring for Kai and giving him small sips of water. Outside, the storm raged noisily, but within the confines of the cabin, Jack experienced a sense of tranquility that he hadn't felt in ages. He was unsure of how long he could maintain this routine or what the future would bring for both himself and Kai. But for the first time in several months, Jack didn't feel isolated. For Kai, it marked the first occasion in years where someone truly cared enough to fight for his survival in those early hours. As dawn broke and the storm finally started to ease, Jack settled down on the floor beside the dog. They were both utterly exhausted, yet neither felt defeated. Together, they were ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. The days that followed the storm faded into a haze of tiredness coupled with quiet resolve. Jack's cabin was quite small, barely accommodating him and certainly not spacious enough for an injured dog, but somehow it transformed into their refuge. Little by little, Kai began to heal. His breathing grew stronger, and he started to eat small portions of food that Jack managed to collect from his limited supplies. The supplies were limited, but the path ahead promised to be extremely challenging. Jack had never experienced such profound solitude. His tiny cabin was enveloped by a vast, empty wilderness with no other people for miles around. The nearest town was several hours away by car, and during winter, with the roads almost impassable, seeking assistance would require more effort than just making a phone call. The storm had already devastated the region, and forecasts indicated more snowfall in the days to come. Kai was lying close to the fire, his head resting on his paws. His once bright eyes now held a dullness that indicated pain, yet there was a flicker of hope, a spark that Jack hadn't noticed when they first crossed paths. Over the days following their encounter, they had developed a silent connection, one built on shared quiet moments and the necessity of survival. Jack had observed the fear and suspicion reflected in Kai's eyes, but he had also witnessed the dog's growing appreciation, evident in the way he would lean against Jack's hand whenever food was offered. Despite these small advancements, Jack understood that their journey was only beginning. Achieving full recovery would encompass more than just physical healing. There were deeper emotional layers to Kai's situation that needed to be addressed. Jack noticed that the dog seemed to be enduring more suffering than just a broken leg and cuts. It was clear to him that this animal had experienced something far more traumatic than an ordinary accident. The sadness in the dog's eyes was profound, a depth of sorrow that no creature should ever have to experience. This desolation resonated with Jack, echoing his own concealed grief, the kind of anguish that remained persistent despite the passage of time or distance. However, he understood that he could not afford to surrender or give up hope. He had silently sworn an oath to this dog that he would advocate for him, just as he had done for every other life he had taken responsibility for throughout his history. Regardless of how painful the journey might become, or how daunting the challenges, he was determined not to abandon Kai. The following morning, Jack resolved that they needed to venture outside. The weather had improved sufficiently for a brief trip. Although the roads might still be partially obstructed, there was a small supply store in town where Jack could replenish his medical supplies. He realized he had completely run out of essentials for Kai, and without appropriate treatment, the dog's chances of survival were dwindling. As Jack prepared to head out, he couldn't help but notice that Kai's gaze was fixed on him. There was a certain quality in the way the dog looked at him, an unmistakable blend of reliance and faith that deeply affected Jack. Jack's chest felt tight, and although he couldn't pinpoint the reason, leaving his dog alone in the cabin for even a short period seemed deeply unsettling. They still had many challenges to face together. He put on his boots and picked up his jacket, whispering to Kai to stay behind, attempting to maintain a calm tone. However, Kai, understanding Jack's intentions, struggled to his feet, clearly in pain as his broken leg shifted. He limped toward Jack, his tail wagging faintly, conveying his unwavering support. Overwhelmed with emotion, Jack knelt down to Kai's eye level and softly said that the dog could accompany him, promising they would take it slowly. Together, they stepped into the biting cold, with Jack meticulously leading Kai through the snow. The path to town was fraught with danger, and the wind howled viciously around them. Yet, with each step, Jack sensed their bond strengthening. This journey had evolved beyond mere survival. It represented trust, companionship, and a shared experience. They were no longer just two individuals caught in a turbulent storm. They had become a cohesive unit. Although the trek to town promised to be long and challenging, Having Kai by his side instilled in Jack a sense of confidence and determination. As Jack and Kai trudged through the snow, the town appeared as a haze of white and gray. Although the roads had been cleared, remnants of the recent storm left everything encased in a thick layer of ice, making each step a challenging endeavor. The more they advanced, the clearer it became to Jack how dire their situation was. The unforgiving weather conditions added to his worries, and he knew that the journey back would be even tougher with an injured dog at his side. However, there was no option to turn back now. He needed to gather supplies for Kai. They walked past abandoned homes, their windows fogged up from the cold, creating an eerie atmosphere that made the town feel almost deserted. Jack couldn't shake off the feeling of loneliness, as if the entire world had succumbed to the freeze, along with the surrounding scenery. The only source of warmth in this bleakness was Kai, who limped alongside him but remained resolute in keeping pace. Occasionally, Jack would steal a glance at his loyal companion, his heart aching at the sight of Kai's still healing broken leg. Though the dog was resilient, Jack understood that even the strongest animals have their limits. By the time they reached the small supply store on the edge of town, both Jack and Kai were fatigued. The dog's breath had become heavy, and his movements were noticeably slower than earlier. Jack's own legs felt like they were on fire after bearing the weight of Kai throughout most of their trek. Yet they had finally arrived. The bell above the shop door chimed gently as they stepped inside, and a wave of warmth enveloped them, prompting Jack to exhale in relief. He quickly scanned the shelves, grabbing whatever essentials he could find: bandages, painkillers, and some food for Kai. The shopkeeper observed them quietly. An older woman with hands that showed signs of years of hard work raised an eyebrow as she observed Jack making his way to the counter. "Are you certain that dog is going to pull through?" she inquired, her voice roughened from many years spent in the chill of the outdoors. Jack paused for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts. He wished he could assure her that everything was all right, and that Kai, his dog, was only slightly injured and would soon recover. However, he found himself unable to do so, as the harsh reality of their situation weighed heavily on him. "I hope so," he replied quietly, his voice nearly a whisper. "He's a fighter." The woman looked at him intently for a moment, before giving a nod. "Well, I wish you both good luck," she said as she packaged the supplies into a bag. Jack quickly paid her, expressed his gratitude, and then turned to leave. The trek back to the cabin proved to be even more challenging. The snowfall had intensified, and the winds were now fierce, stinging against any exposed skin. Jack's legs throbbed with fatigue, and he felt as though his body might collapse at any instant. Nevertheless, he pressed on, knowing there was no room for pause, not at this critical moment. Kai was also struggling. His limp had deteriorated, and he was breathing in a shallow manner. Each step was visibly taxing for him, and Jack could see how worn out the dog was, how he staggered as if the burden of his own weight was too much to handle. Both Jack and Kai were fighting through their exhaustion together. Jack was acutely aware that they were running out of time and resources, and he understood that without assistance, they wouldn't be able to make it back. The situation felt increasingly dire, weighing heavily on his mind as he contemplated the possibility that if they didn't reach the cabin soon, Jack was acutely aware that they couldn't make it back without assistance. The severity of their predicament weighed heavily on him, and he understood that the storm had taken a toll on both of them, and in that moment of hopelessness, Jack resolved not to endanger Kai's life any further. He decided that they needed to get inside, no matter the obstacles he would face. If necessary, he would carry Kai himself. With what little energy he had left, Jack hoisted Kai back into his arms and began to move toward the cabin with a slow but determined pace. Reaching their destination was imperative. There were no alternatives available to him. Upon entering the cabin, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. yet he realized he wouldn't have much time to savor the warmth. Carefully, he placed Kai by the fire, even as his own body trembled from the exertion of carrying the dog back through the storm. Outside, the tempest intensified, but within the confines of the small cabin, it felt as though they had entered a different realm entirely. The heat from the fire gradually began to thaw Jack's chilled bones, but his attention remained solely on Kai. He noticed that the German shepherd's breathing had turned shallow once more, causing a pang of concern to course through him as he observed the paleness of the dog's coat. It was evident that Kai's leg continued to inflict severe pain, yet Jack understood he could not pause now. Failure was not an option. With shaking hands, he began to sift through the supplies he had gathered from town, hoping to find something that could help. As Jack arranged the items on the small wooden table, his thoughts began to drift back to that moment near the cabin when it had seemed like the snow was engulfing them. In that situation, he experienced a wave of emotions beyond mere fear. He felt vulnerable, a sensation he hadn't encountered in many years. Jack had always taken on the role of caregiver, never permitting himself to be the one who needed assistance. This was a protective strategy he had developed during the darkest periods of his life. However, with Kai, things were different. He realized that he couldn't manage everything by himself anymore. The dog had become his responsibility, and in return, Jack found himself becoming responsible for Kai's well-being. Suddenly, Kai let out a low whine, pulling Jack back from his reverie. The dog was moving restlessly, his eyes reflecting discomfort or pain. Jack knelt beside him, gently petting his head and murmuring softly, "Hey buddy, I'm here." But as Jack's hand made contact with Kai's fur, something unexpected occurred. The dog tensed up, and a deep growl erupted from within him. Jack froze, uncertain about what was transpiring. This was far from the gentle demeanor he had come to know in Kai. The growling intensified, growing louder and more aggressive. Instinctively, Jack took a step back, his eyes wide with confusion. He had never heard Kai make such a sound before. The dog bared his teeth, his body rigid. Something was clearly amiss. "Kai, what's wrong?" Jack asked, his voice barely audible, but the dog did not respond. Instead, he fixated on something at the door. It dawned on Jack then what might be happening. A sudden knock resonated through the cabin, sharp and urgent. Outside, the wind howled, amplifying the unsettling nature of the sound. Jack's heart began to race in response to the mounting tension. Who could be knocking at this door? No one travels this deep into the wilderness, particularly not during the harsh winter months. Kai let out another growl, this time even more intense, causing Jack to feel his heart race with anxiety. Something felt wrong. He was unarmed and had no means to defend himself or Kai. With the raging storm outside, it would be impossible to reach the nearest town for assistance. He needed to make a decision quickly. The knock on the door came again, louder than before, accompanied by a man's voice calling from beyond the threshold. "Jack, I know you're in there. Open up." The tone was familiar, yet Jack's thoughts were racing. Could it really be him? It had been weeks since he had seen or heard from anyone. A wave of uncertainty washed over him as he cautiously approached the door. All he was certain of was that Kai had changed. The loyal dog he had been looking after was no longer acting like himself. Something had altered in their situation, something Jack couldn't quite comprehend. "I said open up. You're not going to leave me out here in the cold. I'll freeze out here. You know that." The voice grew more urgent with each passing second. Jack stood paralyzed, his mind inundated with countless questions. Who could be on the other side? What did they want from him, and why now? More importantly, the question arises, why did Kai react with such intensity to the sound of that voice? Without pausing to think, Jack instinctively grabbed the nearest object within reach, a heavy iron skillet from the kitchen, and gripped it firmly in his hand. His heart raced as he cautiously moved toward the door, aware that Kai's growl was escalating, becoming more urgent by the second. In that moment, Jack felt completely in the dark about what awaited him on the other side. He reached for the doorknob but hesitated momentarily. Kai's growl had shifted, taking on a frantic tone. It dawned on Jack that there was something crucial he wasn't being told, something far more significant than he initially realized. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Jack finally opened the door, revealing a figure standing outside, completely soaked in snow, an unexpected sight. It was Ethan, someone Jack had never anticipated encountering again. He found himself frozen in place, breathless and shock-stricken, as shallow, ragged breaths escaped him. Ethan! It had been years since Jack had seen him, years he had actively tried to avoid that reunion. The man before him, covered in snow, appeared almost ghostly, as if time had left him untouched aside from adding a few more years. Yet, despite his mixed feelings of confusion, anger, and an inexplicable darker emotion, Jack couldn't tear his gaze away from Ethan. Kai's voice suddenly pierced through Jack's swirling thoughts, still growling, tense and ready for confrontation. But Jack remained fixated on Ethan. He simply could not look away. "Ethan, what on earth are you doing here?" Jack's voice came out roughened by the cold air. He stepped back slightly, raising his hand to prevent Ethan from stepping inside. "You shouldn't be here, not now." Yet Ethan pressed forward, his expression softening as he noticed the injured dog in the corner. "Jack, I didn't come here to stir up any trouble. I understand you're upset, but Jack felt a pressing need to have a conversation as he looked down at Kai, who continued to growl from his position near the fire. "I know what happened to the dog. He's one of ours, isn't he?" Jack's heart sank as he realized that the truth was arriving more quickly than he was prepared to accept. His thoughts raced to grasp the meaning behind Ethan's recent words. "What are you talking about?" Jack stumbled over his response. "I found him out there in the woods," Ethan explained. "He was abandoned, broken, and all alone. I've been taking care of him ever since." A shadow of guilt mingled with something else on Ethan's face, an emotion that Jack struggled to decipher. "That's the thing," Ethan said, lowering his voice as if he were speaking more to himself. Jack felt a pressing need to have a conversation. He briefly looked at Kai, who was still snarling from his position near the fire. "I know what happened to the dog. He belongs to our team, doesn't he?" Jack's heart sank as the reality of the situation hit him harder than he anticipated. His thoughts raced as he tried to grasp the implications of Ethan's words. "What are you saying?" Jack stammered in confusion. "I found him all alone in the woods, abandoned, broken," Ethan replied. "I've been taking care of him ever since." A look of guilt mingled with something indescribable crossed Ethan's face, leaving Jack bewildered. "That's the issue," Ethan continued, lowering his voice as if confiding a secret. "I didn't abandon him. He was meant to be euthanized." Jack felt his legs weaken and had to hold onto the doorframe for stability as shock washed over him. "No, you..." Jack's voice trembled, but he pushed through the pain to ask, "You were supposed to be his handler. What went wrong?" Ethan's expression contorted with anguish, and he stepped nearer to Jack, who instinctively retreated. "You don't get it," Ethan said, explaining that Kai had once been part of a specialized canine unit. Ethan belonged to a military unit, but after a mission, he was injured and deemed unfit for service. The decision was made that he was no longer of any value to them. Ethan couldn't accept that outcome for his companion. He felt a sense of urgency to protect the dog, and his voice shook as he spoke about it, revealing deep regret in his eyes. So he made a choice to run away with the dog, believing he could shield him from harm. Unfortunately, he realized later that he had made a grave mistake. Jack's mind struggled to process this information. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut. Ethan had taken a military dog, a devoted creature that had served faithfully and tried to assist him. But instead of providing help, Ethan had ultimately betrayed the animal by abandoning it in the cold, leaving it to survive on its own. Jack's attention then shifted to Kai, who was gradually becoming more relaxed. His head tilted as if he were trying to understand the emotions of the man standing. Ethan belonged to a military unit, but after completing a mission, he sustained injuries that rendered him unfit for active duty. The decision was made that he was no longer of value to them. I could not stand by and allow them to treat him that way. Ethan's voice trembled, and Jack noticed a profound regret reflected in his eyes. In desperation, I took him away because I believed I could shield him from further harm. I now realize I was mistaken. Jack's thoughts were spinning. The revelation of betrayal struck him so hard it felt as though all the air had been knocked out of him. Ethan had taken a military dog, a devoted creature that had served dutifully and even attempted to rescue him. Instead of aiding him, Ethan had caused pain and left the poor animal abandoned in the harsh, frigid snow to survive on its own. As Jack's eyes shifted to Kai, he observed the dog's gradual calming down. His head tilted as if trying to understand the man at the entrance. It dawned on Jack, almost for the first time, how profound the bond between him and Kai had become in such a brief period. He had developed genuine affection for Kai, treating him as though he were his own. This connection was strong enough to rise above past betrayals and emotional scars. Jack shut his eyes, fighting back the tears as he choked on the realization. You abandoned him, you just walked away. Ethan recoiled slightly at Jack's declaration, but Jack continued to voice his feelings. I'm not sure I can ever forgive you for what you've done. You can't just re-enter my life as if nothing has happened. You've already shattered the remnants of my being. A heavy silence enveloped them, creating an almost insurmountable barrier. Yet, amidst this quietude, Jack came to a crucial realization. His journey was no longer centered on Ethan, but rather on the dog in the corner. This dog had endured immense suffering, yet continued to display resilience. It was about perseverance, fidelity, and affection, not directed toward a person, but towards a creature that had placed its complete trust in him. Kai is not going anywhere, Jack asserted, his tone firm and unwavering. I refuse to allow you to return him to that torment. He's not going anywhere with you. Ethan remained motionless, caught in a dilemma, but Jack could see the uncertainty flickering in his gaze. I never intended to cause him pain, Ethan murmured, his voice trembling. I didn't realize I was making a mistake. I understand, Jack responded, his voice now gentler. But this situation isn't about your intentions anymore. It revolves around what Kai truly requires, and he deserves someone who will advocate fiercely for him. Gradually, Kai made his way over to Jack, his legs still aching yet filled with unwavering trust. With clear determination, he gently nudged Jack's hand, and for a brief moment, Jack felt an unmistakable warmth of gratitude emanating from the dog. It was as if Kai was communicating that despite their past experiences and the mistakes they had encountered, they had persevered together. Jack turned to Ethan one final time and firmly stated, "You are not welcome here." His tone was resolute once again, but he added, "I will ensure that Kai receives the care he requires. I will keep him safe." With a look filled with regret, Ethan turned away and vanished into the blizzard, leaving Jack and Kai alone in the warm, tranquil cabin. Jack knelt beside Kai, placing his hand gently on the dog's back. "We're in this together, buddy. You're home now, you're safe." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the cabin, a sense of peace enveloped them. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt that he had something truly worth protecting. Together, they embarked on a new journey, not one defined by sorrow or regret, but characterized by resilience, trust, and the quiet promise of fresh beginnings. Jack and Kai established a bond that rose above their previous hardships, a narrative of survival, trust, and redemption that highlighted how even the toughest paths could be navigated. Together, they demonstrated that bravery and loyalty could triumph over any challenges they faced. If this tale resonated with you, remember that compassion and determination have the power to transform lives. Consider subscribing to the channel, giving a like, and sharing this story with someone who believes in the potential of second chances.